our reporters, we've got about 14 reporters now, live in the neighborhoods or are from the neighborhoods where they cover, and they cover each individual area as if it's its own small town. Um, so they cover everything. We don't have a transportation reporter or an education reporter. Each person covers all the news within their borders, because Chicago is a city of neighborhoods and people have strong identities with their neighborhoods. So we really play up that I'm the person from your neighborhood who knows what's going on. And that's really what drives our just sort of our model for individual contributions. We, as media in Chicago has contracted, the big newspapers and the TV stations have really cut the people that do the sort of coverage that Block Club does. They don't go to the school board meetings or the development meetings. They don't interview the weird character on the street. They don't tell the fun stories that we like to do. So increasingly, the narrative about Chicago that is sent out by the other media tends to be the bad stuff that's happening in Chicago. And there's a lot of bad stuff happening in Chicago, but it also becomes a drumbeat of crime, of taxes, of just some boring political coverage as well, where it gets into the not the interesting things. So what we try to do is we cover a lot of that, but we also really try to highlight the good parts about Chicago and the parts that we all know make up cities have good and bad, and we try not to only focus on one or only on the other. We try to create a whole mosaic of what being a Chicagoan and a neighborhood resident really looks like. And I think people appreciate that. They see themselves in us. We try to be very representative of the neighborhoods that we cover. Like I said, we try to hire people from those neighborhoods. And as a result, we're a hybrid of, we have a subscription model, but it's a very generous paywall. I would say about 90% of our stories are free. We don't charge for anyone in parts of town that have been historically undercovered. We don't paywall breaking news or COVID news or crime news. So that when you don't put the COVID stuff behind the paywall, that's a lot of our coverage over the past 2 years is everyone's. So we ask people to support us, and even though there aren't many premium options for us, we have some premium newsletters. But what I think they see is they're seeing coverage that we're doing that the other papers aren't doing, the other news sites aren't doing, and that's why people come to support us. We had our origin story was we were part of a for-profit news site in Chicago. It was called DNA Info, which is just really a terrible name. But we had an owner who's a billionaire who came to town and thought he could make a go of it by selling basically just ads. It was a free site, but we would sell ads and we would cover the city hyper local. We did a real good job of creating an audience. Our last year, we had about 100 million views on stories in a town of 2.7 million. But ultimately, it was a failed model that was never going to work, because as folks know who sell banner ads, you just can't sell enough of them, especially in one market. So we had the benefit of him shutting us down with the click of a button one afternoon, and it left our entire audience high and dry, looking for the sort of hyper-local coverage that we had been providing on a daily basis. So when we came back a month or two later and said, hey, we are going to come back, but this time we're going to be nonprofit, we're going to ask you to support it. We had all these people that knew what we could do, and had missed us for a couple months and realized, hey, maybe this is worth $6 a month to keep them from going away. So that was a huge part of our membership base, was the people who had liked what we had done previously. And when we relaunched, we made sure we had a crowdfunding page going already with a video promising it, and that was huge. We had about 3,000 people donated to us within the month of the crowdfunding, and that really helped us get the initial funding we needed to hire reporters and get started. And that was about 4 years ago. We're up to about 18,000 paid subscribers now, and we're just we're proud of that, but we try to emphasize that this is a nonprofit. This is owned by the public. They're the ones supporting us. They're the ones who we answer to, and that has worked out well for us because they knew a billionaire had owned us, took us away, and now it's something that everybody owns.
Wonderful. We've got a question from Martin. Did you say it's $6 a month for subscription?
Right. It's most of our subscriptions are actually annual. They're $59. You can do $6 a month. We have, we'll do occasional discounts just to rattle the cage a little bit, but that's basically the going rate is about $59. We have different tiers and options that really don't get you anything more, but we phrase it. I love Block Club. I'd like to support it with a little bit more. And we have about 1,000 of those folks actually pay us $100 a month just as a extra gift. And then we also, stick out our hands every other way possible. We have a donation site as well for tax deductible donations. We have some fun with merchandise. If there's a positive news story that's got a fun element to it, we will, for one, there are no alligators in Chicago. Tracy may have some down in Atlanta, but one somehow showed up in a local lagoon, and we were the first to break that story. So we made T-shirts because it took a week to find the alligator, and people were lining the outside of this lagoon waiting for it to be found. And luckily for us, it took a week, and we were able to sell 4,000 T-shirts from all the people that were sort of captured by the frenzy of an alligator in Chicago. So we try to get creative with our fundraising, but it's usually in the context of, this is you, Chicago, we're here to represent you.
That's great. That's I love the alligator story. It's amazing. Yeah. I wanted Shamus to speak because he's so entrepreneurial, and there's so many different ways you can contribute and reasons to contribute. And you're non-profit, or do you have a trading subsidiary as well, Shamus?
We are non-profit. Yes, yeah. That was felt like it was a coin toss in the beginning whether we should be non-profit or for-profit, and we decided it was ultimately would be a better story to tell people. Frankly, we didn't think there would be a much of a profit to begin with, and we weren't looking to flip the company to a larger seller. So the for-profit model worked great for us. That's what we were about. We just wanted to return and be able to get back to doing the news that we had been doing previously at the other company.
Thank you. And there's some questions in the chat. Shamus, can you see them, or shall I read them out?
Go ahead and read them out. I can see them, but.
So one from Padma in Bengaluru. Do you have advertisers and sponsors?
We do have some very limited advertising. We didn't begin with any, but we had a lot of outreach, and some of the cultural institutions in Chicago have come to us to promote things. The Art Institute of Chicago is one of our regular advertisers. If they have a new exhibit, they'll put it, they'll do an ad, and it's all pretty, it's pretty inexpensive, and we have a huge reach at this point. Our morning newsletter goes out to about 110,000 people, many of them who are not regular news readers. We've sort of been converted them, young folks that hadn't grown up reading newspapers. So we will take advertising, but it's not by any means a central pillar of our.
And one more quick question, and we'll hear from Adam, and then we'll come back and do a bit more general Q&A. just in a quick sort of very quick summary, did your membership, this Padma asking this, was your membership affected from the pandemic, either negatively or positively?
It was affected. Our numbers really went up. People really turned to us during, especially the first couple months of the pandemic, when, as is everywhere, but things were taken away from us on a daily basis, and just we had to keep people updated about what the rules and restrictions were, what was happening. So we had, and as I know a lot of news sites did, they saw just traffic really soar and membership soar as people look to local news to guide them about their local restrictions.
Thank you. And Padma, sorry I said Bengaluru. I know you're in Hyderabad because I visited you there. So yes, Hyderabad. We've had. Thank you, Shamus. That's so interesting. We could hear you speak for hours. So let's go to Adam, but stay on, and we'll do some more Q&A with you, Shamus, after Adam, because Adam runs a local initiative called the Bristol Cable in Bristol in the UK, in the southwest of England. Adam, are you there with us? You ready to jump in?
Yeah, for sure.
Lovely.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so my name is Adam. I'm one of the co-founders and managing editors of the Bristol Cable. Bristol Cable is a 100% member-owned local magazine and media cooperative founded in 2014 as volunteers, and we've now progressed to the stage up until now to have 8 full-time equivalent employees and dozens of freelancers and 3,000 paying members who all contribute on average about £3.50 a month, so probably around like $5 a month. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I started thinking behind the cable and actually how it's worked in practice, and also our challenges. But I'll just quickly start by framing the sort of backdrop of this kind of like context in which we began the Bristol Cable. And as we all know, and this is the world that we're sort of working in, is that, but it has kind of like diverse or different effects across the different regions or places that we are in. There's this kind of like chronic sectoral crisis within journalism and the ability to find a viable business model for all different types of journalism, national, international, but in particularly local. And as one of the things that we've seen has been the concentration or conglomerization of local media all across the UK, where now 80% of local media is owned by just 5 companies. And those companies are in turn owned by international asset managers or hedge funds or pension funds from all across the world. And what we see in that is the kind of collapse in quality and viability, partially due to this lack of connection to the communities that they're serving, but also because of the commodification of news as just something else to invest in rather than something that we see as, which is a public service. Now this has obviously been going on for decades and accelerated in the past decade, and COVID has made this chronic crisis an acute one, where we have whole areas of the country, cities and towns that don't have any decent or any at all local journalism available. So our approach to this in 2014 was looking at this framework and this context and thinking, what intervention can we make as sort of people without resources, often without sort of like a substantial professional experience in the sector. And we basically came up with this theory that democratic ownership plus quality public interest local journalism plus community engagement could equal a new business model for local journalism that is viable, that is possible, and is addressing some of these issues that we see that are kind of like interacting in a negative cycle of trust, which is leading to a sort of like departure from people being willing to pay or engage with journalism, which is kind of opening up the space for bad faith actors and fake news and disengagement with the kind of civic and political process as a whole. And so working through those aspects of democratic ownership, public interest, local journalism, and community engagement, I'll start with the first. So the first is that we have 3,000 members And those members are all equal shareholders within the organization. So it's one person, one share. And through various different ways, those members can participate at different levels in what we do. So they can participate in steering the overall strategy, in terms of what we want to focus on for the year to come, editorial focus, voting on different things like campaigns or issues that we will investigate. They'll also be involved in ethical decisions. For example, at the beginning, members help to shape and craft and then iterate on our advertising policy. That is obviously such an important source of trust or mistrust for many people with the media. And then finally, members are able to elect them, put themselves forward for election to the board. And we have a non-executive board that act in a kind of like advisory position that are elected from and by the membership and are from the community and bring different skills and experience and insight to help us steer this community organization. But more than the sort of only the practical tools of people's engagement, this is also about feeding in and feeding back and having a dialogue with the community, or what I've heard and something that stuck with me is the people formerly known as the audience. That is like breaking down the sort of barriers between the community and journalists, and it actually being more of an exchange in many respects, as rather than a sort of like transactional or one-way process. Now that happens in different ways. It happens in person. Obviously, that's been inhibited by COVID, but it also happens through experimentation with different forms of participation, digital participation, and we're actually in the process of building a community relationship manager platform software that manages all the kind of like general aspects of a subscription model, with kind of digital participation tools, forums, voting, polls, that sort of thing, and tip-offs and so on. So that's the first aspect, is the democratic ownership that is owned by the people that it is meant to be serving. Second is the journalism. And this kind of like brings me to something that somebody said to me at the very beginning when we were setting up, is you can be community owned and you can be a co-op, but if you have crap journalism, nobody cares. And so one of the things that we kind of like have focused on is what is our niche, what is missing from this picture. And in particular, what we saw was missing locally in Bristol and in many other places was that kind of like longer form, investigative features, interviews, data-driven history, all of that other stuff that isn't just the sort of like daily news updates, and there's a place for that, and that's important. But what we were seeing is that there was a need for understanding why stuff is happening, not just what is happening, what's the kind of like bigger story beneath the daily headlines. And in particular, as we live in this kind of hyper-connected country and world, connecting the bigger picture with the day-to-day experience. So how can we connect climate change to people's local experience? How can we connect the housing crisis to individual and how that interacts with markets and government regulation to how people understand their experience of like struggling to pay the rent or to find somewhere for them and their families to live. And part of that is also the sort of like investigative and seeking the impact. And we've had some important tangible impact in terms of changing policies or shifting the needle on the kind of like political discussions, but also about different voices and ideas and solutions, and trying to sort of like seek that diversity of contribution too. And that's really important. The solutions aspect is because something you're probably all aware of is this kind of phenomena of news avoidance, where people just feel overwhelmed with the amount of negative or sort of heavy news and journalism that's coming their way, and feel like, okay, I know that this is important, but I'm not really sure what to do with this information. And that can lead to withdrawal or disenchantment with the overall kind of like process of participating in an engaged way in society. Which kind of leads us to the final kind of pillar of our organization, which is community engagement, which we do through different ways, through training, through paid placements for early career journalists, co-production with diverse communities, for example, making documentaries with young people, or particular localities, and then public events such as around elections, where we have panel debates or conversations. We have one coming up now on the sort of renting crisis in Bristol, and then using our digital tools to facilitate that as well. And that's been obviously spurned and sort of pushed forward by COVID. So that's the kind of like what we're aiming to do and what we have been doing. The challenges is that whilst the Bristol Cable has been and is seen often as like a success story, the market is basically fundamentally broken to provide this public service. And that's obviously what Caroline was touching on here, is that there needs to be some sort of systemic or regulatory change. Like there can be, and that supports both individual or singular organizations to advance that and to sort of push the boundaries of innovation and development within this sector, but there also needs to be a shift at a broader level that will enable that and sort of work in tandem with the organizations that are doing that. One of the big things that the UK faces, which you touched on, Caroline, is that there isn't the philanthropy to fill the gap. There just isn't. Our two main funders have been from the US because we cannot find funding in the UK, apart from small pockets of sort of restricted funding, which limits what you're really able to do. And then the other big issue, which is related but not entirely, is the scalability at a local level. Like we have under 500,000 people in Bristol. Bristol's a medium-sized city, and we have 3,000 members. And it's the question of what proportion of or real number of that fixed audience do we need to get to reach this sustainability? And we are far from that in terms of our entire income base being from membership alone, although it is a considerable and significant portion. So finishing up, those are resource constraints at an operational level. We're kind of helping and contributing to different conversations that are happening, particularly in the UK, around some sort of change to the sort of like market structure that will support that is beyond little drops in the pond of funding here, a bit of Facebook money there, that doesn't actually change the fundamental dynamic and is too short term. And ultimately what we will be looking at and want to sort of think about is that how can we contribute to some form of replicability or learning across the sector that can take elements of what we're doing as we take elements from others, whether that's the co-op bit, whether it's the local bit, whether it's the kind of public interest journalism, and come up with a formulation that can survive and thrive within different communities and cities and towns. And so that's really where we are at the moment. We have had a success and we're doing well, but as somebody, quite prominent person in the sector says, at the moment, if in the UK, for media organizations, survival is success. And that kind of shows you the kind of like benchmark of what we're working with. It's like, if you're surviving, then you are succeeding, but actually we need to be shifting the dial so that we're thriving as well.
Adam, that was so articulate and so interesting. And questions, the first one from me, which I'm going to reflect an audience question, is, does the money coming in from your 3,000 members, £3 a month, does that cover your core costs?
No, our core, that covers 35 to 40% of our core costs.
Where do you get the rest from?
The rest of it is from restricted and core funding from various philanthropic and foundation sources. Including
the US rather than the UK?
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question while we're waiting for others. This session is about how we can grow individual donor income, membership, subscriptions, whatever. Do you see that as possible? You were just talking about the number of the 500,000 people in Bristol and your 3,000. Can you, what would you need to grow it? Is it investment in tech? Is it marketing? What would you need to make that grow significantly?
Yeah, I mean, that's like a big question. I think my answer to that, I guess, is a combination of things, and that is essentially one, without being too hung up on it, would be to understand really what is the sort of like viable market, because that's a total population that includes, you know, adults and people who would just never be interested in what we're doing. But what we would need basically is to like reach more people, persuade more people, be more relevant into people's lives. And that is a bit of a chicken and egg situation where we would need the capacity and capability in terms of our resources and our impact to be able to do that, which kind of like brings me back to this other aspect, which I mentioned previously at the end of the talk, is like, we need to be both working on the ground and in the local level and on the operational level, but also thinking about what are the systemic problems and challenges that are inhibiting that in the first place. Like I said, I do believe the market is broken, and we will need, and if we consider public interest journalism to be a public service, then there needs to be some sort of change around that. You mentioned the stuff around charity law. That's something that we're actively engaged in a conversation across the sector about changing, to unlock even a fraction of the amount of money that's available in other places would be a total game changer that would be the sort of enabling financing and capacity building for organizations like ours. Unfortunately, we are in a bit of a dynamic where there's a lot of good ideas and a lot of good people trying to do stuff, but they haven't got the runway or the sustainability support to sort of reach that level of organic sustainability. Like to put it in numbers, we would have to be looking at, it depends on how you kind of like model it, but like doubling, tripling our members in the long term to sort of make it viable, pay people properly, you know, be able to achieving the impact that we want in a way that is sort of within the resources we have.
Okay, I have a quick look at the chat, Adam, while I ask a question to Shamus, because I remember when I visited you, Shamus, which is a long time ago now, nearly 2 years ago, you had just received 3 years of funding for a marketing and fundraising person to develop your individual income streams. How did you persuade a funder to give you that core support?
To me, it really starts, as Adam said, it starts with the journalism. If you're not doing good stories that don't matter, it's hard to persuade anyone to do anything. It's a key part of how we grow our audience too. Like, we feel like we need to be essential to Chicagoans. It's one thing to get a one-time donation from someone, but to get them to want to re-up year after year, or to resubscribe, or however they pay, it's all about the stories and whether we're making a difference. And I think that's how we help persuade some of our larger funders, our philanthropic funders, that we're out there making a difference, and we're making, we're becoming essential. We're filling a gap that other media in Chicago isn't doing, and whether that be small local stories that impact 1,000 people, but we also do some stories that are impacting the entire city, as well as the entire nation. We've had a role recently about some potential fraud in COVID testing sites around Chicago and around the country. So to us, it's really comes back to, it was 3 journalists who started it. It always comes back to the stories for us. If you're, as Adam said, if you're doing crap journalism, it's hard to go far from there.
Thank you. And what I saw in the States and in India as well now is this fantastic synergy between the funders understanding that individual income was a big solution for sustainability, and therefore they will fund the infrastructure that you need, the staff, your marketing and business development person, your tech thing, and etc., to get those individual income donations coming in. So that lovely cycle of good editorial content that's relevant, funders supporting infrastructure, and then a fantastic message to individuals. There are other questions. We've got about 5 minutes, a bit more actually, about 9 minutes for questions. So there's a question from George Brock, who's a UK very well-known journalist in the UK, who's now been leading an academic sector. George, do you want to just talk about your question about editorial content?
Actually, Adam has answered that question in the chat, so I'm going to take the opportunity of having the floor for a second to say that one of the ways in which operations like the Bristol cable can improve in the UK context, excuse me for a moment being completely specifically about Britain, is improving the way in which news operations, local news operations, can be charities. We have a charity law in England which makes it extremely difficult for local newsrooms to operate as charities. Not all charities would want, not all newsrooms want to operate as charities. Not all of them would qualify, but some of them would. And the organization that I chair, which is called the Charitable Journalism Project, is trying to make this situation better. And one of the things we do is offer legal advice to people who might want to explore registering as charities. So I'm very happy to hear from anyone if they want to take any of that further.
Thanks, George, and do put a link to your organisation and you in the chat.
I shall do that right now.
This will probably come back again in structures. I mean, my feeling is that you can be very flexible, and you need to be flexible. We need to move away from feeling that we have to be registered charities in the UK to be able to get the individual income in. I'd welcome any questions or thoughts about that from other people both outside the UK and inside the UK.
Excuse me interrupting, Caroline, or coming in again very quickly, but charitable status assists individual and larger funder donations as well, equally well, if it happens to suit people.
Yeah, I think it can restrict other things as well. It's an interesting debate.
Well, there are some rules you have to obey, which is why I say it doesn't suit everybody, but it can suit some people.
Yeah. I love your campaign, though. I think it's so important that the Charity Commission gets it here in the UK and Scotland as well.
Amen
more questions to Shamus. Somebody was just saying something.
Tracy,
hi, Tracy, come in.
Hi. Hi, Caroline, and I do appreciate what George is saying. Here in the States, it's been a recent phenomenon for us to fund nonprofit journalism organizations, and I'm happy to say that I was part of that movement to help get that started. In the States, you have a lot of independent, smaller news outlets that are for-profit organizations, and for a myriad of reasons, they have chosen not to become nonprofits. It's not always in their best interest. It may not fit their business model. They may be, reluctant to have to deal with the paperwork that you have to do to file to become a 501c3. They don't have access to legal support to help them navigate that system. So there are just a lot of reasons why they do not go the nonprofit route. And so what some of the foundations are now doing is they're going through intermediaries. I worked for one of those intermediaries. I now run one of those intermediaries, and the intermediaries will fund the for-profit organizations. We have to ensure that they are producing a public good, a product for public good. And we assume kind of that burden of making sure that they are adhering to the IRS's, the Internal Revenue Services rules regarding public good and function, even though they're not a nonprofit, they're functioning in that manner. So I just wanted to add that to this part of the conversation.
That's great, Tracy. And actually, we're about to start your session when you'll be speaking as well. So we've got a couple of minutes left. Is there anybody else who's got a sort of very specific question about the resources, the culture, the ownership models to help us drive individual income in this sector? I'm super conscious that, The Guardian is an amazing success of this, but I know that they invested something like £5 million, is my understanding, before they even started getting much income in. And, and they're now even still spending a lot of money on it. So what can, any more thoughts, questions particularly to our wonderful speakers, Shamus and Adam? Again, like all our speakers, I'd just love to hear from you for longer.
I can add, just while we're waiting for a question, that is to Tracy's point, there really has been a wave in the States of nonprofit newsrooms. I probably get a call once once a week at least from someone, 3 people with an idea. Some of them had been laid off at their papers and they wanted to start something. And I always recommend the nonprofit route. While it is daunting to file for not for nonprofit status, but to get tax exempt status is the hard part. But it is doable. We paid an attorney, about $3,000 to do it for us, which was a lot at the beginning, but it was one of the best investments we made. And the paperwork is not as daunting as it seems, especially you've got a little bit of time to do it if you get a fiscal sponsor that could accept donations on your part. To us, while it seemed like a nebulous decision at the very beginning, it was absolutely the right decision for us, and that's what I've been encouraging all these upstart places to do it, because there's a path forward, and it's absolutely doable. And we've seen just the explosion of these small newsrooms all across America. It's been great.
And just a quick question to Adam. You were talking about how you've invested in your database and the fact that the database can drive engagement. We did the same actually at Together TV. We got charitable funding to invest in an amazing database and the people to run it and lead it and everything. And so we've built up a huge audience engagement process. We're not asking them for money yet, and we may not, but did you get funding to do that, Adam? Did you get dedicated funding from a philanthropist or foundation?
So the way we fund that is, one, it was included as a kind of piece of work that we intended to do from some of our core funding. So it wasn't restricted, but it was part of an application that we made to one of the big philanthropic funds. And then as that kind of like came to an end, we were able to partner with actually a German not-for-profit investigative journalism operation called Corrective. And with them, we've been able to partner with them and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism to develop this piece of software. And they've been able to source some funding, and we kind of act as basically the consultants and originators of the project, and they're working with us to roll it out across different newsrooms in Europe. So it's currently sort of under development, and some newsrooms are taking it on board. It's called B2B. I'll drop a link in the chat, and if anybody's interested in engaged journalism and subscriptions-based journalism, then it's definitely something to check out, because the subscription and engagement aspects, there's too many overheads, which means it is sort of limiting the ability for people to take it on, or limiting their confidence. And if we can find a credible tool for enabling that better, then the sector as a whole will be the benefit.
That's a really inspirational note to end on. And thank you so much, Shamus and Adam. I'm determined to get you back again for longer times.